Should we get started? Yes. I'm Amber Walton. It's so nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Lei Wang. We're from the same department.
Instructional Design, Development, and Evaluation. And you, it's also one of our PhD graduate students. We're all in our 4th year.
Yeah.
And Lei's been graduating. She's extremely busy. And
I have a family to take care of. I have 2 kids. I have no choice.
And so, I am so grateful for your contribution to this presentation. And it really was kind of my idea that I sprung under. So thank you so much for your contribution. So for a lot of you, I know this is probably review information, especially for people who study instructional, taking instructional design classes. But we really just wanted to kind of give you an overview of creating learning objectives. And let me share this. First, our learning goal for the workshop. Can everyone see this? Okay. So our learning goal for the workshop is really to equip you with some knowledge and skills to create measurable learning objectives. And so we've got some learning objectives for this workshop, a little bit colored on purpose. So by the end of this workshop, participants will be able to define the term taxonomy and identify the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy in the cognitive domain we focus on today. And to associate active verbs for each of the 6 levels of learning in Bloom's taxonomy. To differentiate between learning goals and learning objectives. To critique examples of learning objectives. And to construct your own learning objective using the ABC format. I guess jumping ahead just a little bit about the difference between learning goals and learning objectives, since do I have the right word? Okay. So the difference between learning goals and learning objectives. So learning goal might be kind of a broad statement, our statement of intent for what we're hoping for the instruction. Well, learning objectives are a little bit more narrow, right? They're more discrete, the intentions for learner performance. So the goal might be broad, the objectives might be narrow components that make up more of a broader goal. So objectives are statements that tell learners what they should be able to do in measurable terms after instruction.
Yeah, let me give you one example. When I was a middle school student, my instructor told me, hey, today we're going to learn a little about tigers. And then she just showed us some pictures, and she didn't tell us anything related to the habitats, the range of the tigers, anything else. And after class, all of my classmates were so confused that we didn't learn so much, we only reviewed the pictures. So definitely the teacher didn't show how to create effective learning objectives, right? So that's the goal. I want you to know something, but how can we know, right? We need to measure. So learning objectives are really important, right? Really, really important. And so we also wanted to give you a definition of taxonomy. And so you have here some snakes, right? All in organizations, the practice and the science of categorization and classification. And so in biology or life sciences, taxonomies might be used to classify organisms by their similarities, differences. Yeah, this term, let's go back to the previous slide. So this terminology is quite familiar in biology or science and learning field, right? But you see, this terminology is not quite used for educational systems. So we always use this terminology to classify things, right? Look like foodie, right? So I think they have something similar, right? So they're groups based on the similar elements or characteristics. So they all have the nutrition contribution. So that's the key characteristics. So that's how we use taxonomy to classify the things we want to identify the key things to develop from lower level to higher level skills.
Right. And so we're talking about the taxonomy for learning, Yeah, so Lei will talk about.
So,
Yes.
I know you like snakes.
Do I like snakes?
Yes.
I don't mind snakes.
Oh, I just thought that the history of snakes.
No, I think just an example of people. Just an example of how, how a taxonomy could be used to talk about so these classification systems, that's kind of an inverted pyramid. But Lei's going to talk about who started using the taxonomy for learning.
Yeah. As we all know, doing research is hard, right? So sometimes you got the idea from other fields. So Benjamin Bloom did the same way. So one day, this American educational psychologist thought, so how could I use taxonomy for educational systems? So maybe we could create some frameworks, right, to classify the statements, to identify the key elements to help educators to identify how students will be learning after giving them a series of instructions. So he developed this idea, and this is a quote I like most, so I would like to share with you. So this is the psychologist that first developed this concept and the framework. So basically, there are 3 domains, but today we only focus on the cognitive domain because that's the most important and most widely used domain of learning. The other 2 are affective domain and the psychomotor domains. Other researchers have developed taxonomies for the affective and psychomotor domains. Bloom was involved in the development of those other taxonomies, but and we can provide you with more details about the affective and psychomotor domains, because really learning objectives can draw on all 3 of the different domains. But like I said, today we'll focus on cognitive. Okay, this is the timeline. So actually, the Bloom taxonomy has another name, that is taxonomy of learning objectives, but it's widely used by the name Bloom's taxonomy. So it was first published in the year 1956, but the work did commence back in 1949. So throughout the years, and in 2001. This framework was updated by a lot of new researchers.
So Lei will talk about the original taxonomy first.
So this is the original taxonomy developed in 1956. So it has 6 categories from knowledge to evaluation. And let's see on this side. So the taxonomy was developed from simple to complex, from concrete to abstract. So that's the basic idea of how Bloom taxonomy was developed. And also, if you want to achieve evaluation at the higher level, you have to develop knowledge, the basic level. Just keep this in mind, and later you can compare this one to the updated one. Amber will introduce the new one.
I will, and just read these off. So starting with our foundation of knowledge, and then comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So then in 2001, it was updated, revised a little bit, but in also kind of the same pyramid structure. So starting with the foundation of remembering, so recalling facts and basic concepts, and some of the active verbs that we might use when we're writing the learning objectives for the remembers level might be define, duplicate, list, memorize, repeat. For understand, that's the next level up. So you need to be able to remember facts kind of before you can understand. Or explain the ideas or concepts. So classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, report, select, and translate. So to have an objective that just says students will understand how to do something, right? It doesn't give you a concrete, measurable, active verb that helps them know how they need to perform to be able to reach that or to achieve the learning. Also moving up is apply, so using information in new situations. Let me read that list of verbs. analyze or drawing connection among ideas. And the next level up from that would be evaluate to justify a stand or decision, or praise and argue, critique. And then kind of at the pinnacle is creating, using all of those levels by creating, producing new and original work.
Okay, I'd like to ask you one question. Compared to the old version, so what are the differences? Can you tell me the differences? Which one do you like better?
This one sounds good first.
Yeah.
Huge, right? I mean, if learning is an action and a process, it makes sense to have verbs as opposed to nouns. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just,
Yeah. I think the new version captures the key of designing learning objectives, right? We use verbs, so action verbs are super important. So this one is widely used now. Oh, not this one.
Yeah.
Not the two one.
Yeah, yes.
I think that evaluation is,
Evaluation,
yeah,
moving to the base category, right? So the competence of creation.
And like that, I come from a background in medical education, and medical education, the model is see one, do one, teach one. Right, so I like that in create, you know, as kind of the production of your knowledge by creating something new, or in medical education, teaching somebody something new based on that knowledge that you see. So.
I was wondering if this is for new structure, where is it?
Synthesize? So that's a good question. Where were you classified? Yeah, I've seen synthesize as a verb used in analysis.
Does this Taxonomy apply to all this?
Yes, any learning or any human performance issue. So it could be corporate training, it could be K-12 education, it could be adult learning.
And some educators use this for evaluation, assessments, and also create courses.
Do you disagree?
I mean, not sure I would disagree. I mean, I think it makes sense, but in practice, once you think of lots of architecture, specialism, because we're usually pushed to create.
Yeah.
I also do that, right? That's you understand. So it's like a circular loop. We usually start with creating, then going back to and creative.
That's so interesting. And I would argue that you still need to know the foundations of mathematical principles behind creating, and maybe you've also compared other designs compared with your own. And so that was part of the process of creation. But that's a really good point too. And I think about fine arts, right? Like singing the aria is the goal, but there's so many other steps that singer would have had to take to get to the point where she can create something.
Maybe just emphasis, not a lower part of the pyramid.
Or maybe it's implied, or maybe in a field like architecture, that it isn't that process is not explicit, it's more of an implicit kind of expectation for your field. That's so fascinating.
sorry. I'll also say there are other students as well, based on different visa status. But I think something that makes something work and well used to have that. We use to understand like we are talking about instructional period, and also we use the program design. So at a university level or graduate level, you mostly expect students to be analyzing, right? Evaluating if you design a curriculum for that purpose, and you want to use Taxonomy as a guide, you will also look at maybe elementary, right? We focus on the content and instruction, we focus on the memory. And then the higher they go, the higher they go to top of the pyramid, the more you expect of them. So maybe engineer those areas, of course, if you can graduate program, the foundation is expectation is that very much remember those more times table down there. Now we have to start thinking about how we can apply I don't know how I would, the level now, the level also is different.
So can be variable by level of the learner and by
Yeah.
the task that's to be learned.
Yeah, I was really thinking the question about learning practice. I need to social science, globalization, and I actually discourage my students to try to do something new because they're looking at theories and like applying theories. Sometimes like, I was wondering how we might evaluate even like in a way like unknown like can't make this can't measure software in the chat things. So we really evaluate this and we encourage them to develop the other that's very huge. So when they use labs,
That's really interesting. And yeah, we have to learn how to problem. But I would also argue that in any situation, in any learning situation, that any of those levels could be used based on prior knowledge, based on the other learning that has already happened maybe earlier this semester. But also that I think creativity can happen in many different formats, and maybe it's not a fully rendered, 3D model of building. But there are opportunities to infuse more creation, more creativity in learning. I also think, we treat this sometimes as a ladder. And it's really a cyclical cycle, because every time you get to a new concept, you start at the bottom. And I mean, it's why you set the bottom, it's the foundation. If you don't have the knowledge, it's really hard, right, to access that. Or even if you do, you might not be able to break it down and understand what you've done to be able to then move forward. So it's I think it's a danger to think that it's so linear as opposed to the person's. And that is, I think that's so right. And it's more of a roadmap, right? Than just a linear process. It's interesting. Yeah, that's awesome.
Actually, I have a different question, but I am not out of the question what you said. I don't know if you could have a scenario. I know you want to teach that a scenario where we have these different cases coming to play, because I'm struggling to see the different parts, and this takes me to my last question. I think we talked about where we see the seeds grow. So
Excellent question, but I want to be forward to your question to our design. So later you will have access to the examples and know how to apply these into your real scenarios. Okay, just wait a second.
Hopefully that will be helpful. But if we don't answer your question, then yeah, I think it would be good to even brainstorm that type of, even though it's not a linear process, to brainstorm how each of the levels. Is it okay if we kind of table that?
yes. That's somewhat.
You had another question though, based on.
No, that's somewhat.
Okay. Any other? This is such a great conversation. Really appreciative for your input. So just again, we're talking about kind of the remembering the understanding. So I'm going to ask you to just say, what are the 6 levels of this taxonomy? So maybe starting at that foundation. Check yourself. Yeah, remember? Understand? That apply. Analyze. Evaluate. Great. Okay. Great. You're checking yourself. Awesome. We talked a little bit about active verbs, and we use them during writing learning objectives because usually,
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you once again. So I just realized that the slide before this, you kind of understand part of the song there before this, but I was wondering, because I thought this is your memory part.
yeah.
How is this related to
So for instance, if we go back up to our learning objective for the So identify the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So you just identify those. That's recall. So you need that memorization, but you're also creating it from a list by yourself. So there's a teacher planning kit that I'll share with you. And some of the verbs can overlap for sure. I wouldn't say that it's black and white, whether identify is definitely in the understand level, or whether it's more, I don't remember. Is that somewhat answer your question?
I definitely understand the name. Sometimes and most times so like when you identify these levels, you need to remember, right? So that starts from that basically.
And then it's to your thinking process. So you definitely relate to the 6 categories you're applying.
Yes. So can I continue with active verbs? So we were talking about how active verbs externalize a behavior, and in that way we're able to observe it. So understanding is a process that we can observe, and therefore we can measure how understanding is happening in the so that's how can understanding be observed. So with active verbs like describe, discuss, explain, identify, they are observable things that we can.
And I know some instructors, if they haven't learned the Bloom taxonomy, they always want students, I want my student to know something, right? It's definitely not variable or like the observable, right? So it's words like appreciate, like. So these words are not there. We don't use them. So we have to choose an accurate action verbs to describe learning objectives, because the learning objectives that guide students throughout your class, you want to narrow, right? So action verbs, that's great important.
So our next activity is just kind of to call out some active verbs, and maybe this speaks a little bit to the remember, understand, the difference between remember and understand. But if you were to think of an active verb for learning that might be in the remember, it's what would you recall? Yeah, that's good. Name, yeah. List, yeah. I think those are great words. Any other remember? Recognize. Sure. I like to think of regurgitate that. You're just it's just that out. It's maybe the best word, but that's kind of what I think of remember. What about understand?
Like explain, right?
Explain, yeah. It's a little bit more complex mental process than just regurgitating information. You're understanding about going out evaluating. What about for apply?
And of course, you can use apply.
Yeah, use. Interpret. Some of the other verbs, implement, execute.
Solve.
Solve, that's good, yeah. Like that, you're using information to solve. What about for analyze? We talked about synthesis. Compare. Yeah, no, I think for analyze, I think grade size is good. Although evaluating is more. Question or test and be for analyze too. Question or test. And then for evaluating, we were talking about right? Assess. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Judge. And then for create. It's active verbs.
That's great. Design, humble,
To build. Formulate.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that can also go with the psychomotor skills, you know, again, to the body. But yeah, teach. So, how do you measure teaching? That's my question back to you. Way to understand. Yeah, I think teach is one of those. It's more mobile, and that there are actually more specific behaviors. So you might have lecture, or you might have, you know, present, or you might have assess students learning. So I think that there are other behaviors within teaching that can fall into this. What do you think is that? Okay, so you have applied your knowledge of Bloom's taxonomy to create some, or to think of some activism. There's also a format that's really helpful for creating learning objectives, which is kind of commonly called ABCD. This person has an E because she's given us an example. But it's helpful to have these elements of learning objective for specificity, and you know, to make the learning objective clear. So we have an audience. Who is it who's going to be doing the behavior? And what is the behavior? What should the learner be able to do after that instruction? The conditions, so under what conditions will the learner be able to do it? And D is for degree, how well done should it be? And so this person's example is instructional design students will be able to write learning objectives with the aid of this document 100% of the time. So she's got who is learning and what the action is, be able to write learning objectives, active verb. And the conditions are the aid of this document, and the degree is 100% of the time. And so even in our own learning objectives for this workshop, we might not have included all of those levels. So I think that that's room for improvement for sure. It's to include all of these levels of specificity within writing and learning objectives.
And also, I want to point out if you use degree, it can be flexible. You can use it to describe your audience because students are at different levels. You can say 100% students can achieve your goal, right? You can say 80%. That makes sense. And also to these 5 foundations, you can also use degrees.
Any questions about ABCD format? Easy rule of thumb. So Lei has created.
Yeah, I created this discussion forum. So use your phone, scan the QR code. So I'd like to give you some examples, okay? You have to critique, are they good learning objectives or not? You can work in pairs, okay? You can find the instruction on the discussion board.
No, you're awesome. Thanks for making this happen. Here's our conductance, water standard, common water standard. The examples that we used include the common water standard. And then just as examples, bring them back. Taxonomy and two notice. So can we help facilitate and pairings? GB choose what to work together. And do you know how to use Padlet? Yeah, there are sections just below. Plays within the prompts, kind of. And then to go down, there's more. So these are the examples that we can. And so you can contribute by pressing this button. And that under this calculator. So you have all those instruct my but then that's second column of this right here, yeah, because yeah, sorry. Wrong, what I thought was important, or how we did it. Yeah. There is not. There's not. Yeah, what's the environment that you will be? Yes, but it's not as well. It's two channels I teach. Yeah, you have sort of a definition of yeah. Right, then I really want to make the language, yeah, we do each one of the people in the industry, and it was really very different. Exactly, remember very different thing about it. So what we see. Just you guys doing this, learning objectives. I'm just curious, and you say so kids. Everything else that is spent on the whole month, that's what you're doing. The more it's just in product and learning habits for the foundation of the system of values for that they get across these steps. Pretty complicated and that's the process. How do you measure that? We have some kind of see where it's not. Yeah. Well, I mean, with level, exactly. So there's all this maybe this workshop.
Actually, we have 4 examples. Remember to go see your comments on each of them. And then you can set them in context. Now we're going to work on the last one, number 4.
That's assessment as well. Because I think sometimes there's some mismatch. So, for instance, if it's a really for every girl, try to see them have a pretty good play. It's all not a thing, but I see where what's it it's really just that's actually the person. I would say why that one business culture very good so that also has to be so they but it depends on who's supposed to know the students that really it's like all
We have to wait 2 more minutes, okay? 2 more minutes.
Patient. And it means we were in the 60s with all of that. Yeah. Oh, the psychology started. It's just and then sometimes the things are that's insurance. Otherwise, So. So we gave you some examples to critique. And I'll share some of my critiques of these, and so maybe there's some differences of behavior and some similarities. But what did you think about teaching a 10-minute lesson about common water snake? They see the shade of the head. Why is that?
I thought the teacher is doing that, but I mean, if we're talking about teaching for the learners who are receiving this, and what are they going to do?
Yeah,
That's exactly what I said, it's like tigers.
but exactly. And I would say even on a foundational level, that there's no audience. We don't know who's doing the behavior. So I might say groups of 3 students will teach a 10-minute lesson about the common waters in their classes. We've got a little bit more this year. And maybe even teach could be broken down into further specific. What about students will learn about the common water snake and score at least 90% on the 10 minutes? I know it sounds so official, and that's good. Maybe it has some conditions, right? And it's got some degree of learning. But we talked about this, we'll learn, right? So what's that? We'll learn what? How do we see it? How do we know that it's happening? So yeah, I think it's
To say it's the general goal, right? Learn and go.
yeah, this would be a good goal, and then it's kind of specific about how that is achieved. I might say students will memorize 10 facts about the common water snake and will score at least 90%. So memorize as much. Well, memorizing is kind of an internal process, but then the condition and help clarify how that's externalized. How about students will compose a high quality creative poem about common water snake?
You say high quality, it's not clear.
Yes, and I suggested that instead of like saying high quality poem, maybe instructor make it more clear that if the instructor expects the poem to be in quality that can be literature or poems.
So that would be using the rules of the journal submission guidelines.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like people like the journal, and like guidelines, we can have better understanding, right? If it's high quality journal, just only better than the journal.
That's true, the guidelines would be different based on every publication requirements. Yeah, and I think high quality is always good for us. And we want everything to be high quality, right? So you have to be more explicit about that. I would also say, because this is composing, this is kind of in the create level and rooms, that sometimes those processes, you might need a grading rubric to be able to assess that. You know, sing an aria. There, you can't do a multiple choice question to assess whether it's good or not. So a grading rubric could be used to help and to give the learners in advance that rubric so they know what the goal is that they're trying to meet. But a rubric would be a way to help to assess the a composition.
Yes, and always find out the rubric is very important in grades, like portfolio or poems or assets, right? So if you really want to add something to the learning objective, you can add some components, right? In the learning objective.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. What is the term we'll be getting? is the snake just the content and the actual behavior is the composition? That's good. So I would say that it's missing the conditions that we talked about. And so students will compose a creative poem of 10 lines or more that contains all the 10 facts that were memorized for class. So this, I think in this example that I gave, was talking more about the content and a little bit less about the actual behaviors of the composition. And what you need to do to be able to compose a poem, and maybe that could be broken down even further to really help be explicit about that creative process. So this was, I think, a little challenging. What about students will describe the 7 most common habitats of the common water snake after 30 minutes of the study?
But ABC was here for some, but we like that could be more specific depending on like what is the level of the students like or the grade that they are in. Like I said that the way the student was level, right? My students would ask me, what's the word limit?
Yeah, what do you want? That's what they would do. Exactly. I think you as the instructor be more explicit about the degree. What's the benchmark that they're working towards? And so I might, tack on the 90% on a grading rubric at the end, and then distribute.
Yeah, I really like how you use ABC to narrow these examples. So this is the right way when you're creating your own learning.
Exactly, and kind of, a way for us to frame it as well. So, yeah.
Last one you have, the last,
Oh, yeah, let me go back to
sorry,
this one. Students will describe
yeah, and then
on the.
the right, learning objective were there.
Oh, it's not very good.
So my question, we are not here because on several people, but if you have more than one active verb, in learning objective, what is that? Detail.
That is such a good point, and we would call that stacking questions. And so a learner won't know how to do both of the things, or might not know how to do both of things. And how do we measure something if we're stacking one thing on top of the other? So again, medical education is, do you have any fever, chills, or heart palpitations? How does the person know how to answer that thing? You need to ask them one thing at a time, and I think that's true. And yet they're so well, this is kind of the degree, but yeah, I think that having 2 active verbs can be really confusing. And so probably I would wordsmith this to boil it down. What do you think?
You're right. And I was just thinking because over here we have students who all the students are going to strive. And we obviously know that the foundation or the degree, or we have go to school. The question is, who's going to school? Is it the same student go to school? The teacher not go to school? Student go to school. Why is student go to school? Go to school at least that is something really outline. So
Yeah.
that's the strat of school.
That's such a good point. And is this really the terminal behavior that we're looking for? Like, how do we want them to be able to use the information? Is it just that they're scoring an A on the test? Or do we want for them to be able to demonstrate their improvement more meaningful?
Or maybe it can be broken down into projects, right?
Yeah.
First the strat, and
Yes.
then they use the rubric, because the idea is actually learning how to use the rubric as well. So it's necessary to address how to use the rubric after describing. So we will have to different learning objectives.
Exactly, such a great point. But we can't just assume that they'll be able to complete all of the items on the rubric to the degree that we are expecting, unless we give them some training on some practice. These are such great comments, everybody. So grateful for this. So and maybe this goes back to Brian's question. What do you think the context of class that you're teaching, or if you're not teaching actively right now, the class that you're taking, and using the ABC format? What do you think? You write it out, just share with us. We could also, by suggestion, go through each of the 6 levels and try to write a learning objective for each of the 6 levels based on kind of the same content and topic.
We'd like to give you 3 minutes, right? 3 minutes to work on that, and then you can write on the tablet or on the Mac.
Such great discussion. So grateful.
I really like the students, so they
And all of like, oh, honey, you need to be better at local dishwasher. Well, can you be specific about what you do? I want you to staff this. I'm going to do some specific feedback now. But truly, well, no, we're kind of running out of time. It's 12:57. I want to make sure that we all have time. What I want to pass out is another handout that was given to me in one of my first TA workshops with a TA mentor, Heather. Heather Wayman, thank you. Heather Wayman. I keep this posted here on my computer in home office. I use this all the time. I didn't hand it out ahead of time because it's got some verbs. But this is also in the 1956 categories instead of the revised. Yeah. So I hope that this is interesting to you. I use color coding all the time. Actually, I also color code the notes that I take in articles based on this to help me kind of classify as I'm taking notes. And especially in mental, you can then organize your notes by color code. Just to summarize, we talked about taxonomy, is the science of categorization and classification, and then we talked about the 6 levels of Bloom. We talked about learning goals and learning objectives and the difference between those. We talked about active verbs, and then observable, measurable, and then the ABC format is really helpful for writing. So we probably won't have time, but if you'd like to maybe even tear off the last page of your handout and give us a little bit of feedback so that we can improve our presentation skills. If you have any continuing questions, you can even tear off the bottom if you like, or raise up this on the tablet. If you want on the tablet in this column, you can just add a comment to give us a little bit of feedback about this workshop. So grateful for your participation. You were all amazing.
Yeah, you're all amazing.
Thank you so much for your attention. I have a question about taxonomy. This is a sort of general question. I was thinking it is also hierarchical, and you inherent thing of taxonomy, I guess classification does that.
I think it's that, another way I've seen blooms is like a sphere with another sphere around it, with another sphere around it. So it is kind of, it encompasses but interesting that when you mentioned earlier about this being kind of a cyclical process, that isn't very linear and that there is that kind of hierarchy that's applied in taxonomy. So it's fascinating. I don't know if I have the right answer for that. It's just if anybody have any thoughts about that. Yeah. Everyone is